Hello and welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, AC Dunlap, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today. Joy in Our Town brings you issues and the problems that are faced in the local community with the hope of finding a solution. Today, our guests for this segment are Brenda and Mark Stewart, founder and co-founder of the Addicts Parents United. They join us today to share important information regarding support for families of addicts, along with how codependency can contribute to drug use. Welcome. We're so glad that you've joined us today. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your organization and who you are?
We're the Addicts Parents United. 6 years ago, we found out that our son was addicted to heroin. It began with prescription opiate use and evolved into heroin addiction. At that point, we are like many families, parents who first discover the addiction of a child, the fear, the anger, the guilt, the shame, all of the emotions and the feelings that go with finding out that your child has addiction. As we evolve through that, and we evolve through understanding addiction and learning to deal with it, my wife's great passion has become the Addicts Parents United, where we give support for families who are experiencing the same thing that we experienced.
So as the founder and co-founder of the organization, can you talk about maybe what your roles are within the organization?
Absolutely. We originally formed a community page for news and events in our area and beyond, and then we formed our closed page for sharing and caring. We screen carefully, basically, everybody on our closed pages. They're Facebook pages. We started out with our main support group, and it basically focuses on parents, but we do have other family members that join our page. We screen to make sure that they're a fit for us. We don't want people on there trying to, persuade or solicit the page. So we're very careful on our screening. Myself personally, I've been dealing with my son's heroin addiction, not only, but also I have another child that has the disease of addiction. My ex-husband is in recovery for addiction. My sister is 23 years in recovery. So I've had a long line of addiction in our family. It started with both of my sons when they were 17. But when you have heroin come about, it's like hearing cancer or, something, because it is a lifelong disease, and there is no cure other than, working their program and doing what they need to do.
So when someone says that someone is an addict, really what does that mean from your perspective?
That they have a disease, substance use disorder, which is an actual disease, and that, they need support.
Okay. What are some of the challenges that you feel families face with someone who is addicted?
The devastation, the shame, the per se being in the closet, afraid to let anybody know because of the stigma that surrounds this disease. And we are trying to break down some of those barriers of the stigma, because once you educate yourself, which is absolutely critical to do, and find support for yourself as parents and family, you begin to understand that it truly is a disease, and that we didn't cause it, we can't cure it, and we can't control it. But we do have to take care of ourselves in this process, because we can get as sick, if not sicker, than our children in the process of this with codependency.
From what you've seen, how do drugs or drug addiction control someone's life?
Well, the drugs alter the brain chemistry. And I'm not an expert in that arena, but the dopamines and how the brain behaves is changed once you begin drug use. And you get to that dependency where, and especially with heroin, as powerful as it is, will control behavior. You'll take a child that is or a human being that has a good moral compass, and will change that moral compass to where they'll do anything for that next fix.
And I feel it's that way for all substance use disorder, not only heroin. I mean, once it takes hold, and there's so many different factors, genetics can play a role, family lifestyle as far as growing up can play a role. Having mental illness can be huge. And they say usually it goes hand in hand a lot of times with the disease.
So how do you help someone if you have a family member who, I guess maybe first, what are the signs maybe? If someone is questioning whether or not someone in their family is addicted to drugs, what are some things that they should look for or that you may see?
As far as heroin goes, pinpoint pupils, being very tired, sick, missing spoons, little balls of foil, Q-tips. There's just so many different things. A good source is just to look online. There's so much information online. We're not experts by any means. We're not a doctor or anything else. We're just sharing our own personal experience. I want to make sure that that gets out there.
Yeah. And sometimes personal experiences are the best teachers, even though stories differ from person to person. So as parents, what has been maybe the emotional impact of having a person in your family who's addicted?
All of our journeys are very similar. You first find out about the addiction in your family. The first piece is fear. There's anger as well, but the fear that your child will die from the addiction. That drives crazy behavior. You'll do anything to try to fix the problem. We know parents who've sent their children to dozens of rehabs and spent life savings trying to fix the addiction. All of us go through and are driven by that fear of our child dying. And we begin to understand that this addiction is stronger than we are. We begin to understand that the very thing that we think we are doing to help the problem can be what we call standing in the way of letting things happen that need to happen for the addict to find the point where they're ready for recovery. So many of us at the beginning think we can jump in and fix it and make it better. And as we move through our journey, and as all of those who move through this journey must find that point of where they're powerless and they have to give it up to the higher power to manage what we can't do for ourselves. The emotional toll that takes on families that have lost their life savings or that face the frustration that they cannot stop the addiction, or even those who've lost their child to addiction and to the disease. All of that is trauma. They use the term post-traumatic stress syndrome, and it is very real. The trauma and the stress and the emotion that families go through in trying to deal with the addiction that is within their family. And to deal with it where they all feel alone. They feel no one understands. They withdraw from their social circles. They become introverted within the family. So there is so much emotional impact once addiction hits the family that people that don't deal with it don't understand how intense and how strong that is.
So do you think that it's important for organizations like this, or even for you all, and we appreciate your transparency and sharing your story so that others can see that they're not the only family maybe that is possibly going through this? Because sometimes we think that we don't say anything because we feel like, you talked about shame, we're the only ones. So do you think your program also impacts people in that way as well?
Absolutely. One of the first meetings that we ever went to, and there are some great face-to-face support group meetings in this area. When we first walked in there, I was desperate. And I cried, I think, the first month. I couldn't even say my name because I was so, emotionally impacted. But to hear other parents say heroin, meth, heroin, whatever the drug was, it's like, I'm not alone here. And that's we've been going to that meeting for over 6 years, and through going to that meeting and through going to counseling and doing things to get us in a better place ourselves personally, you understand that so many people do feel like because I felt the exact same way. Even though we're losing 129 children a day to heroin addiction, The overdoses and the deaths are astronomical. On our page alone, in the last 2 weeks, 3 of our parents have lost their children.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's devastating. We also have a group called Survivors of Loss, which is a subgroup of our main page. And we have 3 of our administrators have actually lost their children. And they run that page, and that page is strictly for those that have lost. So they have their own place for grieving and sharing and caring.
I think another element that's a part of this is, I call it the bad parenting syndrome. You know, you think at the beginning it must have been something I did. It must be something some mistake I've made. And I think the stigma outside, in the outside world that is looking in at the addiction, says it must be bad parenting, it must be something you've done. My children aren't that way because I raised them correctly. But this disease is affecting everybody. Middle class America, athletes, football players, you know, the valedictorians. It's affecting so many. And that stigma is a very difficult one to work through, to get to that point where I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, and I can't control it.
If you could give some advice or just some words of wisdom to people that are dealing with these issues now, what would they be?
Well, one thing I learned is we don't give advice.
Okay.
But we do share our own stories.
Okay.
And that's what we do on our page also, because everybody's journey is different. And what I've learned in this process is that there's no right or wrong way to do things.
Okay.
It's a process. It's a process not only for our children to find their own recovery, but it's also a process for us to find our own recovery. Because as I said earlier, we can get crazy. And it doesn't just affect the parents, it affects their children, you know, our children's children. We adopted 2 children through this process.
Okay.
It affects the other siblings. I know my daughter has been affected tremendously by this. It affects grandparents. I mean, it affects everybody. And that's why getting the help and support for yourself is so critical. We've had parents on our page that we've had to send the police to check on because we were afraid they were going to harm themselves.
Wow.
The advice is you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone. Seek out others who are experiencing the same trauma and difficulty you are, and share and learn from each other.
Well, we thank you today for sharing your experience, and I definitely know, I believe it's going to bless someone, but we thank you for your time. Coming up next on Joy in Our Town, Treatment Solutions. Stay with us. We'll be right back.